Here's what nobody tells you about how relationships actually end. It's not usually a fight. It's not a dramatic moment, a confession, a door slamming. Most of the time, it happens through a series of very ordinary sentences, sentences that sound completely reasonable until you understand the pattern underneath them. And by the time that pattern becomes visible, you've already lost months. If something feels off in your relationship right now, not a specific thing you can point to, just a heaviness you can't shake, this is for you. The pattern, not the moment. I've spent years working with men who came to me after a relationship fell apart in a way they never saw coming. And the thing that strikes me every single time is this: they always knew something was wrong. They felt it in their chest, in the way conversations had started to feel slightly off, in the quiet shift in how she looked at them. Their gut was tracking it in real time. What they didn't have was a framework for what they were sensing, so they dismissed it, told themselves they were overreacting. Sometimes they were even convinced that they were the problem because the framing they'd been given made it sound that way. What I want to give you today is that framework. We're going to look at 4 specific behavioral patterns that often appear when someone is emotionally withdrawing from a relationship. Not as proof of anything. One of these patterns, in isolation on a bad week, can mean almost nothing. But as a sequence, building on each other, consistent over time, they tell a story. And the final piece of this, the single most useful thing you can do when you recognize any of these, I'll give you that at the end. One move, not a checklist, not a strategy, one thing. Let's get into it. Pattern 1. I just haven't been in the mood lately. This one sounds completely reasonable the first time you hear it. Life is hard. Work piles up. People get tired. You hear it and your instincts say, be understanding. Give her space. Don't make this harder. And often, that's the right response. Stress is real, exhaustion is real, but here's the distinction that matters. When someone feels genuinely connected to their partner, stress doesn't usually kill the desire for physical closeness. It often does the opposite. It drives people toward the person who feels like home, not toward passion every night, but toward warmth, contact, the simple comfort of being held. Real exhaustion says, I don't have the energy for much tonight, but I still want to be near you. A different kind of withdrawal looks different. It's not just reduced, it's redirected. She's not pulling away from physical closeness in general. She's specifically and consistently pulling away from it with you. The tell is contrast. If the same person who says, I'm just not in the mood, is also suddenly back at the gym every morning, interested in her appearance in ways she hadn't been for years, energized in contexts that don't involve you, that's not exhaustion. That's energy that's going somewhere. And the question worth sitting with is, where? I worked with a man, David, early 40s, who'd been patient for months with exactly this. His partner said she was drained, worn out, just needed time. He believed her because it was a believable story, until he noticed the contrast. She was exhausted at home, but full of energy everywhere else. He couldn't square it. He didn't have a word for it at the time. What he was looking at was redirection, not absence of desire, but desire that had moved somewhere else. Watch for the contrast. That contrast is honest in a way that words often aren't. Pattern 2. I just want to focus on myself right now. Here's where I want to be genuinely fair, because this one is the most complicated. Personal growth is real. Healing is real. Sometimes someone does need space to work on themselves, and that process can look temporarily inward. A healthy relationship can hold that space. It's not a sign of anything on its own. But there's a meaningful difference between growing that pulls a couple forward and growing that builds walls. Real personal growth, in the context of a genuine relationship, tends to be collaborative eventually. She's reading something that changes how she sees herself, and she wants to talk about it with you. She's learning about her own patterns, and she's curious about yours. The growth makes her more present, more open, more interested in building something together. The other version works differently. It becomes a private project you're systematically excluded from. Every attempt you make to be part of her journey gets met with resistance. Your desire to stay connected gets reframed as you not respecting her independence. Your interest in her growth becomes evidence of your control. Here's the painful inversion at the heart of this. She takes your natural, healthy impulse to stay close and turns it into a character flaw. Chris, mid 40s, came to me with this exact story. He'd supported every workshop, every book, every retreat, but the growth never came home with her. It was all private, all separate, all pointing in one direction, away. When he asked to read the same book so they could discuss it, she told him it was her journey, not his. Real growth makes love more possible. Growth that requires you to disappear makes something else more possible. Ask yourself, does her growth include you eventually? Or does every step she takes require more distance between you? Pattern 3. You're being too controlling. This is the most psychologically damaging of the four, and it works by turning your instincts against you. Here's the mechanism. You ask a reasonable question, the kind any person in a relationship would ask. Where were you last night? Who's been texting you? Normal questions, questions that come from caring about someone, not from distrust. And instead of being answered, the question becomes the problem. Suddenly, the issue isn't the information you were asking for. The issue is your insecurity, your jealousy, your inability to trust, your controlling nature. You came in with a simple question and left carrying a character indictment. Now, sometimes that's accurate. Some questions genuinely do come from a place of insecurity or past hurt, and that's worth examining. Not everything is manipulation. But here's the test that separates those situations from this pattern. When someone has nothing to hide, questions feel easy. Transparency comes naturally when you're telling the truth. The person with nothing to hide usually explains without being pressed, offers details, reassures, opens up. When someone is keeping something from you, every question feels dangerous. Not because you asked it wrong, but because any honest answer risks exposure. So instead of answering, they go on the offensive. Your question becomes their defense. Mark, early 50s, told me about the night he noticed his girlfriend hiding her phone screen and asked, calmly, no accusation, who was messaging her. What followed was a sustained attack on his character. He apologized before the conversation was even over. He found out months later what she'd been hiding that night. The question wasn't the problem. The question was getting too close to one. Here's what this pattern does over time. If it's sustained, you stop asking, not because the questions stop being valid, but because asking them consistently costs you too much. You begin to police your own instincts. You tell yourself, I'm being too sensitive. You go quiet, and the situation continues, unchallenged, in the space your silence created. Your instincts are not the problem. They are data. Don't let anyone convince you to turn them off. Pattern interrupt. Let me pause here because I want to be direct about something. These patterns are real. They show up, and they matter to understand. But I also want to say this. The goal isn't suspicion. It isn't building a case. It isn't becoming someone who treats every ordinary moment as evidence of something wrong. The goal is clarity, being able to read what's actually happening rather than just what you're being told is happening. Because the most disorienting experience in a relationship isn't betrayal. It's the sustained confusion of being told one story while living another. Understanding these patterns doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you honest with yourself about what you're seeing. Pattern 4 is the most sophisticated one of the four, and the most important to understand if the first three have already shown up. Pattern 4. I just want us to be honest with each other. On the surface, this sounds like everything you've been waiting to hear. Finally, real communication, actual openness, the moment where things could turn around. And I want you to hear this carefully. What this pattern often signals isn't honesty, it's selective honesty. And selective honesty is a more sophisticated form of control than silence ever was. Here's how it plays out. The invitation to be honest opens with her getting curious about you, your past, your wounds, your fears, your insecurities, the things that made you who you are. And you open up because this is what intimacy looks like and you wanted this. But when you turn it around, when you ask about the person she keeps mentioning at work or why she's been distant or what's actually going on, the tone shifts immediately. I thought we agreed to trust each other. Why do you always make this about suspicion? I'm sharing so much, and it's still not enough for you. She used your willingness to be vulnerable as leverage. Your openness became proof of your investment. And she gave you just enough of her own to maintain the appearance of balance, while carefully protecting the one thing that mattered most. Genuine honesty moves in both directions, without effort. It doesn't require management. It doesn't make you feel guilty for asking questions. And it doesn't use your vulnerability as a mechanism to keep you calm while something else is happening. If honesty flows freely in one direction and locks up the moment it turns toward her, that isn't vulnerability, that's positioning. The single move that changes everything I promised you, one move. Here it is. Don't argue, don't chase, don't demand answers. When you argue, you shift the conversation to your behavior instead of hers. When you chase, you hand over proof that she still redirects your emotions. When you debate her words, you're fighting on the wrong ground. Words are movable, adjustable, reframable. Actions are not. So observe. When she says she's not in the mood, don't fight it. Watch the contrast. Is she withdrawing from closeness in general or specifically from you? When she says she wants to focus on herself, don't beg. Watch the direction. Does her growth bring her closer to you, or does it consistently require more distance? When she calls your questions controlling, don't get defensive. Ask yourself honestly, was the question unreasonable, or was it basic? The kind any healthy partner would ask, and it still generated an attack. When she calls for honesty, don't get swept up in the offer. Watch if it flows both ways, or if you're the only one being asked to open up. And above everything else, trust what your gut has been telling you. Your intuition is not paranoia. It's your nervous system processing what your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. The slight shift in her tone, the way she holds her phone, the laughter that sounds slightly different, the air in the room that changed before you could name why. When everything she says sounds reasonable, but your chest still feels heavy. Trust your chest. That's not drama, that's data. Closing, what you actually deserve. Here's the simplest version of everything we covered today. The right relationship is not one where you have to work this hard to understand what's real. It's not one where caring about closeness gets reframed as control, where asking normal questions makes you the villain, where you're invited into openness while being kept out of the truth. The right relationship is one where love is easy to see, not impossible to prove. Your power isn't in winning an argument, it's in clarity, in watching what's actually happening, in trusting yourself enough to act on what you're seeing, not just what you're being told. You are not paranoid for noticing. You are not controlling for asking. You are not insecure for wanting a relationship where you don't have to feel like a detective just to feel close to someone. You deserve something that doesn't require that much work to understand. And knowing the difference between that and what we walked through today, that's how you find it.